20 years ago, a 22-year-old college student named Eleanor Hayes vanished on her short drive home from work, through Portland's rain-soaked streets, leaving her mother, Catherine, in endless despair. Police suspected she had run away since her silver Honda Civic was never found, and no signs of struggle existed. But with little evidence, and mounting public pressure from a grieving community, the investigation eventually hit a dead end in the filing cabinets of cold cases. Yet over the years, Eleanor's mother never gave up hope, keeping her porch light on every single night as a beacon of unwavering faith, until a breakthrough in forensic DNA technology changed everything. A microscopic detail overlooked in 2006 suddenly revealed the truth, shaking Portland's tight-knit community to its core and rewriting the ending of this haunting mystery. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime documentaries. October 14, 2006, the neon lights of downtown Portland cast fractured rainbows across rain-slicked pavement as the city settled into its familiar autumn rhythm. A cold drizzle fell steadily from the overcast sky, the kind that soaks through jackets and chills bones, typical Pacific Northwest weather that locals had learned to navigate with practiced indifference. Inside Grind Coffee House on Southeast Hawthorne Boulevard, 22-year-old Eleanor Hayes was wiping down the espresso machine for the last time that Saturday night. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, secured with a pencil she'd forgotten was there, and paint stains dotted her apron from the art project she'd been working on during her break. Eleanor was a senior at Portland State University, majoring in fine arts with dreams of opening her own gallery someday. She worked 25 hours a week at Grind to pay for her textbooks and art supplies, always cheerful despite the demanding schedule that left dark circles under her green eyes. "Another masterpiece?" asked Jake Morrison, her coworker, nodding toward the small canvas propped against the register where Eleanor had been sketching between customers. Eleanor smiled. That genuine smile that made strangers feel like old friends. "Just playing around with some color combinations. Professor Chen wants us to explore emotional landscapes." She gathered her art supplies and tucked them into her worn leather messenger bag, the same bag she'd carried since high school. "I'm thinking of using these Portland street scenes. The way the rain makes everything look like watercolors." Jake finished counting the till while Eleanor swept the floor one final time. At exactly 10:15 p.m., she hung up her apron and grabbed her rain jacket from the hook by the back door. "See you tomorrow," she called out, her voice carrying that familiar warmth that made everyone at Grind feel like family. "Drive safe," Jake replied, not looking up from the deposit slip he was filling out. "Roads are slick tonight." Eleanor stepped into the cool October air, pulling her jacket tight around her shoulders. Her silver 202 Honda Civic sat under the flickering streetlight in the employee parking area behind the coffee shop. The car wasn't much to look at: a few dents in the passenger door, a crack across the windshield from a rock that had bounced off a truck 6 months earlier. But it was hers, and it ran reliably enough to get her the 12 minutes home to her shared apartment on Division Street. She slid behind the wheel and turned the key. The engine coughed once before settling into its familiar purr. Eleanor glanced at the clock on her dashboard. 10:17 p.m. Perfect timing. She had planned to spend an hour working on her latest painting before bed. A street scene she'd been developing that captured the lonely beauty of Portland's late-night atmosphere. The route home was simple and direct: left on Hawthorne, right on 39th Avenue, straight to Division, then another right to her apartment building. She'd driven it hundreds of times, often while talking on her phone with her mother, Catherine, who lived across town in the Woodstock neighborhood. Catherine Hayes had raised Eleanor as a single mother after her husband died in a construction accident when Eleanor was 15. The two women spoke almost daily, their relationship built on shared struggles and unconditional love. But that night, Eleanor's phone remained silent in her purse as she pulled out of the Grind parking lot and turned left onto Hawthorne Boulevard. The streetlights reflected off her wet windshield as she drove past the late-night restaurants and vintage clothing stores that gave the neighborhood its eclectic character. A few pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks, hunched against the rain, but traffic was light for a Saturday night. Back in 2006, surveillance cameras were far less common than they would become in later years, Most businesses relied on basic security systems with grainy black and white footage that was often too poor quality to be useful. GPS tracking in vehicles was still a luxury feature, found mainly in high-end cars, not in college students' used Hondas. Cell phone technology existed, but without the sophisticated tracking capabilities that would later become standard in criminal investigations. At her apartment on Division Street, Eleanor's roommate Sarah Chen was already asleep, exhausted from her own shift at a downtown restaurant. She wouldn't realize Eleanor was missing until the next morning when she found Eleanor's bed unslept in and her coffee mug still clean in the dish rack. But when Eleanor Hayes didn't come home that night, when her silver Honda Civic failed to pull into its usual parking spot behind the converted Victorian house they called home, the clock started ticking on one of Portland's most haunting mysteries. Sunday morning dawned gray and overcast, with thick clouds hanging low over Portland's east side like a heavy blanket. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the streets gleaming wet under the pale morning light. At 147 Division Street, Sarah Chen was already dressed and ready for her morning jog when she noticed Eleanor's absence. Sarah knocked gently on Eleanor's bedroom door. "Ellie, are you okay in there?" When no response came, she pushed the door open to find the bed neatly made, exactly as it had been the day before. Eleanor's pajamas lay folded on the pillow, and her phone charger sat unused on the nightstand. A chill that had nothing to do with October weather ran down Sarah's spine. Eleanor was many things: artistic, dreamy, sometimes forgetful about mundane details, but she was never irresponsible about communication. In the 3 years they'd been roommates, Eleanor had never stayed out all night without calling. Sarah tried Eleanor's cell phone first, listening as it went straight to voicemail after several rings. "Hey, it's me. Just wondering where you are. Call me back, okay?" Her voice carried a note of forced casualness that didn't quite mask her growing concern. By 9 a.m., after calling Eleanor's phone 6 more times and reaching out to their mutual friends with no success, Sarah made the decision that would officially begin the investigation. She dialed Eleanor's mother. "Catherine? It's Sarah. I'm sorry to call so early, but is Eleanor with you?" Sarah asked, gripping the phone tightly. Catherine Hayes had been in her garden, tending to the late-season roses that Eleanor loved to sketch. She paused, pruning shears in hand, as an inexplicable dread settled in her chest. "No, honey. She's not here." "Why? What's wrong?" "She never came home last night. Her bed wasn't slept in, and she's not answering her phone." The pruning shears fell from Catherine's hands, landing with a soft thud in the damp earth. That's not like her. Eleanor would never just disappear without telling someone. Within 20 minutes, Catherine Hayes was standing in her daughter's bedroom, looking at the untouched bed and feeling the walls of her world begin to crumble. She picked up Eleanor's favorite sweater from the chair where it had been draped, holding it against her chest, as if she could somehow summon her daughter back through sheer force of will. At 10:43 a.m., Catherine Hayes walked into the southeast precinct of the Portland Police Bureau to file a missing person report. The desk sergeant, Officer Michael Torres, was a 20-year veteran who had seen his share of missing person cases. Most turned out to be misunderstandings, college students who stayed over at friends' houses without calling home, or young adults who took spontaneous trips without thinking about the worry they might cause. "My daughter Eleanor Hayes is missing," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "She didn't come home from work last night." Officer Torres looked up from his paperwork. "How old is your daughter, ma'am?" 22. "She's a student at Portland State and works at Grind Coffee House. She left work at 10:15 last night and never made it home." Torres began filling out the initial report, asking the standard questions about Eleanor's description, her habits, any recent problems or changes in behavior. Catherine answered each question with precision, painting a picture of a responsible young woman with no history of risky behavior or mental health issues. "Has Eleanor ever stayed out all night before without calling?" Torres asked. "Never. Not once. My daughter would never just leave without telling someone where she was going." Catherine's voice grew stronger with conviction. "Something happened to her. I know my daughter." The official search began that afternoon. Eleanor's car description was entered into the statewide database: silver 2002 Honda Civic, license plate number JFH293, with a cracked windshield and minor dents on the passenger side. The information was distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout Oregon and into Washington state. Detective Lisa Park was assigned to the case. A 15-year veteran of the Portland Police Bureau, Park had worked dozens of missing person investigations. She interviewed Jake Morrison at Grind Coffee House, retracing Eleanor's final known movements and establishing a timeline. She seemed completely normal, Jake told Detective Park. Maybe a little tired, but that was typical for a Saturday night shift. She was talking about her art project, excited about working on it when she got home. There was nothing unusual about her behavior or mood. By evening, volunteers from the neighborhood had organized an impromptu search party. They combed through Laurelhurst Park, checked the banks of the Willamette River, and posted flyers at bus stops and grocery stores throughout southeast Portland. Eleanor's face, smiling from her Portland State student ID photo, began appearing on telephone poles and community bulletin boards. What began as a search for a missing student quickly grew into a desperate race against time, as a community united in hope while secretly fearing the worst. Monday morning brought a sense of urgency that transformed Eleanor Hayes' disappearance from a missing person case into a full-scale investigation. Detective Lisa Park arrived at the Southeast Precinct before Bourdain, her desk already covered with Eleanor's file, witness statements, and a large map of Portland marked with potential search areas. The October air was crisp and clear as search teams gathered in Laurelhurst Park at first light. Overhead, the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cut through the morning silence as Portland Police Bureau's aviation unit began systematic aerial sweeps of the heavily wooded areas surrounding the city. The pilots used specialized cameras capable of detecting heat signatures and unusual ground disturbances, technology that was considered cutting-edge, and Detective Park coordinated ground teams equipped with trained cadaver dogs, German shepherds, and bloodhounds, whose sensitive noses could detect human scent even days after it had been deposited. The dogs worked in methodical grid patterns through Forest Park's 5,200 acres, their handlers following behind with GPS units that marked every area covered. "We're treating this as a suspicious disappearance," Detective Park announced to the assembled volunteers and media that had gathered at the command post. "Eleanor Hayes is not the type of person to simply vanish without contact. We need the community's help, but we also need people to stay within designated search areas and avoid contaminating potential evidence." The tip line established by Portland police began ringing constantly. Possible sightings poured in from across the metropolitan area. A young woman matching Eleanor's description seen at a bus stop in Beaverton, another spotted at a convenience store in Gresham, a third reportedly walking along Interstate 84 near the airport. Each tip required follow-up investigation, stretching the department's resources thin but providing hope that Eleanor might still be alive. Catherine Hayes became a fixture at the search command post, arriving each morning with coffee and homemade sandwiches for the volunteers. She carried Eleanor's photograph everywhere, showing it to anyone who would look, her voice never wavering, as she described her daughter's distinctive features: the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall, the way she always tucked her hair behind her right ear when she was concentrating. "She has this laugh that you can hear from across a room," Catherine told a reporter from the Oregonian newspaper. "It's infectious. People always remember Eleanor once they meet her." The investigation revealed Eleanor's methodical nature through her personal belongings. Her apartment was neat and organized, with a calendar on her desk that showed her work schedule, class times, and social commitments, meticulously planned weeks in advance. There were no signs of hasty packing, no missing clothes or personal items that might suggest she had planned to leave town. Detective Park interviewed Eleanor's professors at Portland State, her coworkers at Grind Coffee House, and every friend whose name appeared in Eleanor's address book. The picture that emerged was consistent. Eleanor Hayes was responsible, predictable, and deeply connected to her family and community. She had no secret relationships, no financial troubles, no history of depression or risky behavior. "Eleanor was probably the most reliable person I knew," said Jennifer Walsh, Eleanor's best friend since middle school. She's the kind of person who calls if she's going to be 5 minutes late. The idea that she would just disappear without telling anyone is impossible. The search expanded to include areas along the Willamette River, where specialized dive teams used sonar equipment to scan the murky depths for any sign of Eleanor's Honda Civic. The river had claimed vehicles before, sometimes accidentally when drivers took curves too fast on rain-slick roads, sometimes intentionally when people wanted cars to disappear. Technology available to investigators in 2006 was limited compared to what would become standard just a few years later. Cell phone tower triangulation existed, but was far less precise than it would later become. Most surveillance cameras recorded on tape systems that automatically recycled footage every few days, meaning potential evidence was lost, if not collected quickly. Social media was in its infancy. Facebook required a college email address and was primarily used for campus socializing, not the comprehensive digital footprint that would later aid investigators. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the helicopter crews had covered hundreds of square miles of Oregon wilderness. The cadaver dogs had investigated every reported scent trail, following them to dead ends in parking lots and bus stations. Dive teams had searched miles of riverbank and checked dozens of ponds and lakes throughout the metropolitan area. Despite exhaustive efforts involving more than 200 volunteers, 50 professional searchers, and thousands of dollars in overtime pay for Portland Police Bureau officers, every path led to the same frustrating conclusion: Eleanor Hayes and her silver Honda Civic had seemingly vanished without leaving a single trace. The silence was deafening, and it was about to stretch on for nearly 2 decades, leaving investigators frustrated and a family broken by unanswered questions. In the weeks following Eleanor Hayes's disappearance, Portland's Southeast Division transformed into a community bound together by shared anxiety and determination. Coffee shops that had never displayed missing person flyers suddenly devoted entire bulletin boards to Eleanor's photograph. Local churches opened their doors for prayer vigils, and neighborhood associations organized safety meetings that drew crowds far larger than their usual attendance. The Hawthorne district, where Eleanor had worked and vanished, became the epicenter of community mobilization. Business owners along the commercial strip installed additional exterior lighting and began staying open later to provide safe havens for anyone walking alone after dark. The owner of Grind Coffee House, Maria Santos, kept Eleanor's time card in the employee schedule long after it became clear she wouldn't be returning to claim her final paycheck. "We never locked our doors before this happened," said Helen Martinez, who lived 3 blocks from Eleanor's apartment building. "Now we check the locks twice before bed, and we watch our neighbors' houses like hawks. Everyone's afraid it could have been their daughter, their sister, their friend." The fear was palpable, but it manifested as protective action rather than paralysis. Parents began escorting their college-aged children to and from work. Local businesses organized carpools for employees working evening shifts. The sense of vulnerability that had settled over the community created bonds between neighbors who had previously exchanged only polite nods. Detective Park's investigation generated hundreds of tips, each requiring careful follow-up despite the strain on department resources. The anonymous tip line received calls around the clock, some helpful, others clearly from people whose grasp on reality was tenuous, and a few that seemed deliberately misleading. One particularly promising lead came from a security guard at a storage facility near the industrial district. He reported seeing a silver Honda Civic with what might have been a young woman inside, parked behind his building around midnight on the night Eleanor disappeared. The timing and location fit the investigation parameters, but when detectives arrived to review the facility's security footage, they discovered the cameras had malfunctioned earlier that week and recorded only static. Another tip came from a truck driver traveling Interstate 5 south toward Eugene. He was certain he had seen Eleanor's car pulled over on the shoulder near Wilsonville, with what appeared to be a police vehicle parked behind it. However, when investigators checked with Oregon State Police and local jurisdictions, no traffic stops matching that description had been documented for that night. The most disturbing lead came from an anonymous caller who claimed to have information about Eleanor's disappearance, but would only speak in cryptic references to someone she trusted and not what it seemed. Despite multiple attempts by detectives to arrange a face-to-face meeting, the caller never followed through, leaving investigators with tantalizing fragments that led nowhere. As the investigation progressed, Detective Park focused on Eleanor's personal relationships with renewed scrutiny. She conducted extensive background checks on Jake Morrison, Eleanor's co-worker, who had been the last person to see her alive. Jake submitted to a polygraph examination voluntarily, passed without showing deception, and provided a solid alibi for the hours after Eleanor left work. He had gone directly to his girlfriend's apartment, where they had watched movies, until after. The investigation expanded to examine Eleanor's academic connections at Portland State University. Professors were interviewed about any unusual interactions with Eleanor, and her classmates were questioned about potential romantic interests or conflicts. Eleanor's art studio was searched thoroughly, her paintings and sketches examined for any hidden messages or references that might provide clues to her disappearance. Eleanor was well-liked but not particularly social outside of class, explained Professor David Chen, who taught Eleanor's advanced painting course. She was focused on her work, always professional in her interactions. I never observed any inappropriate attention from other students or any signs that she felt unsafe on campus. Community vigils became weekly events, held every Sunday evening in Laurelhurst Park. Dozens of people gathered in circles, holding candles and sharing memories of Eleanor, while her mother Catherine stood in the center, clutching a framed photograph of her daughter. The ritual provided comfort to a neighborhood struggling with uncertainty, but it also served a practical purpose, keeping Eleanor's case visible and encouraging anyone with information to come forward. Local media coverage intensified as Eleanor's story captured public imagination. The Oregonian ran a series of articles exploring safety issues for young women in Portland, while television news crews regularly visited the search command post for updates. Eleanor's face became familiar to viewers throughout the Pacific Northwest, her story shared during evening broadcasts and morning talk shows. But even as the community united in their determination to find Eleanor Hayes, crucial evidence was slipping by unnoticed, buried in routine police reports and forensic analyses that would remain incomplete for nearly 20 years. By November 2006, Detective Lisa Park's desk had become a fortress of frustration, built from manila folders, evidence bags, and witness statements that seemed to lead everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Eleanor Hayes's case file had grown thick with reports, photographs, and laboratory analyses that painted a comprehensive picture of a young woman who had simply evaporated from existence. The Portland Police Bureau's evidence room contained Eleanor's personal effects, items recovered from her apartment that might provide clues to her disappearance. Her journal, filled with sketches and artistic observations, revealed nothing more sinister than concerns about upcoming art shows and affectionate references to her mother's cooking. Her computer, a desktop model that predated widespread laptop adoption, showed only innocent browsing history, art supply websites, Portland State course materials, and email exchanges with friends about mundane social plans. We have no body, no crime scene, no witnesses to an actual abduction, Detective Park explained to Eleanor's mother during one of their weekly updates. Without Eleanor's car, we're missing what could be our most important piece of physical evidence. The absence of Eleanor's silver Honda Civic represented the investigation's most significant challenge. In 2006, vehicle recovery relied heavily on patrol officers spotting abandoned cars during routine patrols, or citizens reporting suspicious vehicles in their neighborhoods. Unlike later years when automatic license plate readers would scan thousands of plates daily, finding Eleanor's car required human eyes and manual searches. Detective Park had coordinated searches of every public parking lot, abandoned building, and remote area within a 50-mile radius of Portland. Police tow yards from Vancouver, Washington to Salem, Oregon, had been contacted multiple times. The car's description had been distributed to used auto parts dealers and scrap yards throughout the Pacific Northwest, based on the theory that someone might have stolen the vehicle and dismantled it for parts. Forensic science in 2006 operated under limitations that would seem primitive just a decade later. DNA analysis required larger samples and more pristine evidence than later techniques would need. The National DNA Database, CODIS, contained approximately 4 million profiles, substantial for its time, but a fraction of what it would grow to contain. Cellular phone tracking existed but lacked the precision that GPS technology would later provide. Detective Park had identified 3 potential suspects based on Eleanor's social connections and work relationships, but each investigation reached the same dead end: lack of evidence. The first was a customer at Grind Coffee House who had asked Eleanor for her phone number several times and seemed unusually persistent in his attention. However, multiple witnesses confirmed he had been at a birthday party across town on the night Eleanor disappeared, with dozens of people vouching for his presence until well after midnight. The second suspect was Eleanor's ex-boyfriend from high school, David Morrison, no relation to her co-worker Jake, who had struggled to accept their breakup 3 years earlier. David had occasionally called Eleanor and sent gifts she had returned unopened, but investigation revealed he had been working a night shift at a warehouse in Tigard, with security cameras and time clock records confirming his presence during the crucial hours. The third and most promising suspect was Thomas Mitchell, a maintenance worker at Portland State University, who had access to campus buildings and had been seen talking to Eleanor near the art building on several occasions. Mitchell had a criminal history, including a conviction for assault 5 years earlier, and he owned a pickup truck that could theoretically transport Eleanor's Honda Civic. Detective Park spent weeks investigating Mitchell's background, obtaining search warrants for his home and vehicle. The search revealed nothing connected to Eleanor: no personal items, no evidence of violence, no indication that he had any significant interaction with her, beyond brief conversations about art projects she was working on in the campus studio. The polygraph examination offered Mitchell yielded inconclusive results, showing stress responses that could indicate deception, but might equally reflect anxiety about being questioned in a criminal investigation. Without physical evidence linking him to Eleanor's disappearance, the investigation could proceed no further. Media attention, initially helpful in generating tips and maintaining public awareness, began to create additional pressure on the investigation. Local news reporters called Detective Park daily, seeking updates that didn't exist. Families of other missing persons contacted the police department, asking why Eleanor's case was receiving more resources than their own loved ones' investigations. Internal pressure within the Portland Police Bureau mounted as the case consumed hundreds of hours of detective time without producing arrests or significant breakthroughs. Captain Robert Shaw, who supervised the detective division, held weekly meetings to review progress and allocate resources to Eleanor's investigation versus other active cases requiring attention. The frustration reached beyond professional disappointment into personal anguish for Detective Park, who had developed a connection to Eleanor's case that extended beyond her usual professional detachment. She studied Eleanor's artwork during off-duty hours, trying to understand the young woman's perspective and mindset, searching for clues that might have been missed in official interviews and evidence reviews. With no leads producing actionable evidence and department resources stretched thin by other investigations, Eleanor's case would soon become another cold file in Portland's archives of unsolved mysteries. The spring of 2007 brought cherry blossoms to Portland's neighborhoods and a devastating realization to Catherine Hayes: her daughter's disappearance was no longer an active investigation. Detective Lisa Park delivered the news gently but directly during a meeting at the Southeast Precinct that Catherine would remember for the rest of her life. "We're not closing Eleanor's case," Detective Park explained, her words carefully chosen to provide hope while acknowledging reality. "But without new leads or evidence, we have to shift our resources to investigations where we have actionable information. Eleanor's file will remain open, and any new tips or evidence will be investigated immediately." Catherine sat in the hard plastic chair across from Detective Park's desk, staring at the thick folder that contained everything official Portland knew about her daughter's disappearance. 6 months of intensive investigation had produced nothing more than confirmed sightings of Eleanor, leaving work and theories about what might have happened afterward. That evening, Catherine Hayes made a decision that would define the next 17 years of her life. She walked to her front porch, unscrewed the standard light bulb from the fixture beside her door, and replaced it with a bright, warm white LED bulb that cast a welcoming glow across her small front yard. Then she flipped the switch and made a promise. The light would stay on until Eleanor came home. "I'll keep this light on until she walks through that door," Catherine told her sister Margaret during one of their weekly phone calls. "I don't care if it's tomorrow or 20 years from now. Eleanor needs to know that someone is always waiting for her." The ritual became Catherine's anchor in a world that suddenly felt unstable and unpredictable. Every evening before bed, she would step onto the porch to make sure the light was working. Every morning when she left for her job at the Multnomah County Library, she would glance back to see the beacon still glowing against the daylight. When storms knocked out power in the neighborhood, Catherine would sit by her window with a flashlight until electricity was restored. Eleanor's bedroom remained exactly as it had been on the morning of her disappearance. Catherine changed the sheets weekly, but otherwise left everything untouched. Art supplies arranged on the desk, clothes hanging in the closet, a half-finished painting propped against the window where Eleanor had positioned it to catch the morning light. Friends and family members gently suggested that preserving the room might be preventing Catherine from processing her grief, but she was adamant about maintaining the space for Eleanor's return. The annual vigils continued, evolving from desperate search efforts into community rituals of remembrance and hope. Every October 14th, on the anniversary of Eleanor's disappearance, dozens of people gathered in Laurelhurst Park to light candles and share memories. Catherine organized the events with military precision, coordinating with police for permits, arranging for local musicians to provide acoustic guitar accompaniment, and preparing printed programs with Eleanor's photograph and a summary of the case details. "These vigils aren't just about Eleanor," Catherine explained to a reporter from the Portland Tribune. "They're about all the families who are waiting for answers, all the people who have disappeared without explanation. When we remember Eleanor, we remember all of them." The vigils served practical purposes beyond their emotional value. Each year, Catherine distributed updated flyers with Eleanor's photograph, aged by police forensic artists, showing how she might look as she grew older. The events kept Eleanor's case in public consciousness, occasionally generating new tips or renewed interest from potential witnesses who had moved to Portland after her disappearance. Catherine became an advocate for families of missing persons, joining support groups and lobbying for legislative changes that would improve investigation protocols. She testified before the Oregon State Legislature in favor of laws requiring faster police response to missing person reports and better coordination between jurisdictions. Her advocacy work provided a sense of purpose that helped her channel grief into productive action. Cold case units in police departments typically review unsolved files periodically, but with limited funding and personnel, these reviews are often perfunctory. Eleanor's case was examined briefly in 2009, 2012, and 2015, but each review reached the same conclusion. Without new evidence or witnesses, there were no additional investigative steps to pursue. The emotional toll on Catherine's family extended beyond her own suffering. Eleanor's younger brother Michael, who had been 17 when his sister disappeared, struggled with survivor guilt and anger at law enforcement's apparent inability to solve the case. He left Portland after high school graduation, moving to Seattle, where he could build a life that wasn't constantly shadowed by his sister's absence. Margaret, Catherine's sister, became the family's emotional caretaker, visiting Portland monthly to check on Catherine's well-being and encourage her to maintain social connections beyond Eleanor's case. She worried that Catherine was disappearing into her grief, becoming defined entirely by her role as the mother of a missing person, rather than maintaining her own identity and interests. For nearly 2 decades, silence hung heavy over the investigation, broken only by the annual vigils and occasional media coverage on significant anniversaries, until science finally caught up with the truth that had been waiting in an evidence locker all along. As Portland evolved through the first 2 decades of the 21st century, transforming from a quirky Pacific Northwest city into a national destination known for its food scene and cultural diversity, Eleanor Hayes' disappearance became woven into the neighborhood's collective memory, like a persistent shadow that never quite faded. New residents moving into the Southeast Division learned about Eleanor's case through informal neighborhood networks, conversations at coffee shops, discussions at community meetings, cautionary tales shared among parents dropping children at local schools. The story took on mythical qualities among longtime residents, becoming a reference point for discussions about safety, community responsibility, and the fragility of ordinary life. The Grind Coffee House changed ownership twice during Eleanor's absence, but each new proprietor maintained a small memorial corner with Eleanor's photograph and a brief summary of her story. Regular customers who had known Eleanor kept her memory alive through annual fundraisers for missing person advocacy groups, turning their grief into action that might help other families facing similar uncertainty. Every time I drove past that corner where she used to catch the bus to work, I thought of her, said Patricia Wong, a neighbor who had lived on Division Street for 15 years. You don't forget someone who just vanished from your neighborhood. It makes you realize how quickly a normal life can become a mystery. Eleanor's case influenced local policy and community practices in subtle but significant ways. The Portland Police Bureau revised its missing person protocols, partially in response to lessons learned from Eleanor's investigation, implementing faster response times for cases involving individuals with no history of disappearing. Local businesses along Hawthorne Boulevard organized safety initiatives, including improved lighting and informal buddy systems for employees working evening shifts. The annual vigils continued throughout the silent years, though attendance fluctuated with the seasons of community attention and media coverage. Catherine Hayes remained the constant organizing force, her presence at each October gathering serving as a reminder that Eleanor's story was not historical. It was ongoing, unresolved, and deeply personal for a mother who refused to accept uncertainty as finality. Portland State University's art department created an informal memorial scholarship in Eleanor's name, though it was never officially recognized by the university administration due to legal concerns about honoring someone whose fate remained unknown. Art students learned about Eleanor through professors who had taught her, and her unfinished paintings were displayed briefly in campus galleries during annual exhibitions devoted to works by deceased or missing artists. The psychological impact on Eleanor's former classmates and coworkers rippled outward as they graduated, married, started careers, and began families of their own. Many reported feeling a persistent unease about Eleanor's unresolved disappearance, a sense that their own safety and security could never be taken for granted. Some left Portland entirely, seeking fresh starts in cities without personal connections to mystery and loss. Jake Morrison, Eleanor's co-worker who had been the last person to see her alive, struggled with survivor guilt and obsessive worry about whether he might have noticed warning signs or taken different actions that could have prevented her disappearance. He eventually changed careers from food service to social work, specializing in support services for families of missing persons, a career path directly influenced by his experience with Eleanor's case. Social media's emergence and expansion during the 2010s brought new attention to Eleanor's story as true crime podcasts and online discussion forums discovered her case. Amateur investigators analyzed evidence photographs, debated theories in Reddit communities, and created Facebook groups devoted to solving cold cases. While most of these efforts produced nothing more than speculation, they served to keep Eleanor's name circulating in public consciousness. The Portland Tribune published retrospective articles about Eleanor's disappearance on significant anniversaries, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years missing. Each article drew responses from readers who shared memories of the original investigation, offered new theories about what might have happened, or simply expressed continued hope for resolution. The comment sections became informal support groups for people affected by similar losses. Local crime writers and journalists periodically revisited Eleanor's case for magazine articles and documentary projects, but none generated significant new leads or evidence. The story had been thoroughly examined from every conventional angle, leaving investigators and writers to acknowledge the frustrating reality that some mysteries resist solution despite exhaustive effort and genuine commitment. Eleanor's case became a teaching tool for criminal justice students at Portland State University and other regional colleges. Professor Catherine Martinez, who taught a course on cold case investigation techniques, used Eleanor's file with family permission to demonstrate the challenges facing investigators when physical evidence is minimal and witnesses are scarce. The passage of time created a strange dual reality for Eleanor's mother, Catherine. The world moved forward with technological advances, cultural changes, and new generations of residents, while her personal experience remained frozen on October 4, waiting for information that might finally explain what had happened to her daughter. Then one day, a single piece of evidence resurfaced in a Portland Police Bureau storage facility, and everything changed with the power of scientific advancement meeting persistent hope. February 12, 2024. Detective Maria Santos arrived at the Portland Police Bureau's cold case unit on a Monday morning that felt no different from countless others, carrying her usual large coffee and scanning her emails for weekend developments. Santos had been assigned to the unit 8 months earlier, after 12 years in narcotics, bringing fresh perspective to investigations that had frustrated previous detectives for decades. Eleanor Hayes' case file sat in Santos' assignment queue, along with 37 other cold cases, ranging from 1987 to 2019. The file had been flagged for periodic review, but like most cases from the mid-2000s, it seemed to offer little hope for resolution. Original evidence had been collected using methods that were state-of-the-art for 2006, but primitive by 2000. The breakthrough began with a mundane inventory update required by new evidence storage protocols. The Portland Police Bureau was transitioning to digital tracking systems for all physical evidence, necessitating detailed cataloging of items that had been stored for years without systematic review. Detective Santos volunteered for inventory duty, viewing it as an opportunity to familiarize herself with cold cases that might benefit from fresh examination. In storage locker B47, Detective Santos found Eleanor Hayes' evidence box containing items that had been collected during the original investigation, but never fully analyzed due to technological limitations of the time. Among the stored materials was a small piece of fabric, approximately 2 inches square, that had been cut from Eleanor's car seat after the vehicle was finally recovered from the Willamette River in March 2007, 4 months after her disappearance. The car had been discovered by recreational divers exploring underwater formations near Ross Island, its silver paint barely visible beneath layers of river sediment. When it was finally winched from the water, investigators found Eleanor's purse, cell phone, and personal belongings inside, but no trace of Eleanor herself. The fabric sample had been collected as potential evidence, but stored without analysis, when initial DNA testing proved inconclusive. This wasn't possible in 2006, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic DNA specialist at the Oregon State Police Crime Laboratory. The techniques we have now can extract viable genetic material from samples that would have been considered useless 18 years ago. We can work with degraded DNA, mixed samples, and trace amounts that older methods couldn't process. The fabric sample contained biological material, skin cells, hair follicles, and what appeared to be blood, that had been preserved by the car's submersion in cold river water. Modern DNA extraction techniques could separate Eleanor's genetic profile from foreign DNA that had been deposited on the fabric, creating distinct profiles for comparison against national databases. Dr. Walsh's laboratory used next-generation DNA sequencing, a technology that could analyze genetic material at the molecular level with precision impossible. The process involved amplifying microscopic DNA fragments through polymerase chain reaction, then using advanced computer algorithms to reconstruct complete genetic profiles from degraded samples. The initial analysis confirmed Eleanor's DNA on the fabric, as expected, but the sample also contained DNA from an unidentified male contributor, genetic material that had not been detectable using the foreign DNA profile was complete enough for comparison against CADIS, the FBI's national DNA database that now contained more than 20 million profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees, and crime scene evidence. Detective Santos submitted the unknown male DNA profile to CODIS on Friday, February 16, expecting the standard turnaround time of several weeks for database comparison results. Instead, her phone rang Monday morning with news that would reshape Eleanor Hayes' case entirely. "We have a match," Dr. Walsh announced, her voice carrying excitement that professional forensic scientists rarely allowed themselves to express. "The DNA profile matches a subject in CODIS. Name is Robert Mitchell, white male, 47 years old, currently residing in Portland, Oregon." Detective Santos pulled Robert Mitchell's criminal history and felt her pulse quicken as the details emerged. Mitchell had been convicted of assault in 2019, 13 years after Eleanor's disappearance, and his DNA had been entered into CODIS as required for felony offenders under Oregon law. Prior to his 2019 conviction, Mitchell had no serious criminal record and would not have been in any DNA database available to investigators. The address listed in Mitchell's file was in southeast Portland, less than 3 miles from where Eleanor Hayes had worked at Grind Coffee House. Employment records showed that in 2006, Mitchell had worked as an automotive technician at Morrison's Auto Repair on Division Street, the same garage where Eleanor had taken her Honda Civic for oil changes and minor repairs. Hope reignited with the intensity of a wildfire as Detective Santos realized that scientific advancement had finally provided the key that might unlock nearly 20 years of mystery. Eleanor's mother, Catherine, received the phone call she had been waiting for since 2006, though the information came with questions as complex as the answers it promised. And with that test result, printed on a simple laboratory report, suspicion turned to revelation, and the community would never see one of its own the same way again. The name Robert Mitchell meant nothing to Detective Santos until she began piecing together the connections that would expose how a trusted community member had hidden in plain sight for nearly 2 decades. Mitchell's auto repair business sat on Division Street at a converted garage that had served the neighborhood's car repair needs since the night. Local residents knew him as Bobby, the reliable mechanic who stayed open late to help customers with emergency repairs and never charged extra for simple fixes. Mitchell's workshop occupied a corner lot with easy access to multiple major streets, making it a convenient stop for college students and young professionals who needed affordable car maintenance. The business specialized in older vehicles, exactly the type of used cars that students like Eleanor Hayes drove. His reputation for honest pricing and quality work had built a steady customer base over 15 years of operation. Employment records revealed that in October 2006, Mitchell had been working at Morrison's Auto Repair, owned by his uncle David Morrison, no relation to Jake Morrison, Eleanor's co-worker. The garage's customer files, stored in boxes in the basement office, contained Eleanor Hayes' service records, dating back to August. She had brought her Honda Civic to Morrison's for oil changes, brake inspections and a transmission repair that had cost her 3 weeks' wages from Grind Coffee House. Detective Santos drove to Mitchell's current address on a gray February morning, observing the modest ranch house where he lived alone since his divorce. And the property was meticulously maintained, lawn trimmed with precision, garden beds prepared for spring planting, tools organized in a workshop visible through the garage's open door. Nothing about the exterior suggested anything more sinister than an obsessively neat homeowner. Surveillance of Mitchell began immediately, conducted by rotating teams of detectives who documented his daily routines while prosecutors prepared warrants for his arrest and the search of his property. Mitchell followed predictable patterns: coffee at 6 a.m. at a drive-thru near his home, work at his auto repair shop from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., grocery shopping on Thursday evenings, church attendance on Sunday mornings at St. Andrew's Catholic Church. He was right under everyone's nose for 18 years. Detective Santos explained to Eleanor's mother during a briefing at the police station. Mitchell had access to Eleanor's car through his work at the garage. He knew her schedule, her routines, her vulnerabilities. And until his 2019 arrest put his DNA in the system, we had no way to connect him to her disappearance. The DNA evidence was compelling but circumstantial. It proved Mitchell had been in Eleanor's car at some point, but it didn't establish when or under what circumstances. The prosecution needed additional evidence to build a case that could withstand the scrutiny of a criminal trial and the defense arguments that would inevitably follow. Detective Santos interviewed Morrison's auto repair employees, who had worked with Mitchell in 2006, discovering disturbing patterns of behavior that had been overlooked at the time. Former coworker James Chen recalled Mitchell's unusual interest in female customers, particularly young women who came to the garage alone. Mitchell had volunteered to handle their repairs personally and sometimes worked on their cars after hours, claiming he wanted to provide extra attention to ensure their safety. Bobby was always helpful with the girls who came in, Chen told Detective Santos. Maybe too helpful. He'd remember details about their lives, ask about their schedules, offer to pick up their cars if they needed rides while repairs were being done. At the time, we thought he was just being nice. Now, I wonder what he was really doing. The investigation revealed that Mitchell had kept detailed records of customer interactions beyond what was standard for automotive repair businesses. His personal files, discovered in his home workshop, contained notes about female customers' work schedules, living situations, and personal relationships, information that served no legitimate business purpose but would be valuable for someone planning criminal activity. Mitchell's marriage had ended in 2018 following allegations of controlling behavior and emotional abuse, though his ex-wife Linda had never filed criminal charges. When contacted by Detective Santos, Linda Mitchell described a man who had become increasingly obsessive about monitoring her activities, tracking her movements, and interrogating her about conversations with male coworkers or neighbors. Robert needed to know where I was, every minute of every day, Linda Mitchell explained during a recorded interview. He would check the mileage on my car, go through my phone, and follow me to work sometimes. When I finally left him, he stalked me for months, until I got a restraining order. I always wondered if there were other women before me who had dealt with his obsessions. The genetic genealogy analysis provided additional confirmation of Mitchell's connection to Eleanor's disappearance. Advanced DNA comparison techniques could determine that the biological material found in Eleanor's car had been deposited within hours before or after her death, based on cellular degradation patterns and chemical composition. The shock of betrayal rippled through Portland's Southeast Division as residents realized they had trusted their vehicles and their safety to a man who had hidden his true nature behind decades of helpful service and community involvement, fixing their cars while secretly planning devastating violence against the vulnerable young women in their neighborhood. Dawn broke cold and clear over southeast Portland on March 8, 2024, as a convoy of unmarked police vehicles quietly positioned themselves around Robert Mitchell's modest ranch house on 32nd Avenue. Detective Santos checked her watch, 5:47 a.m., and gave the signal that would end 18 years of uncertainty for Eleanor Hayes' family and community. The arrest warrant had been signed by Judge Patricia Henderson after prosecutors presented DNA evidence, circumstantial connections, and witness statements that established probable cause for kidnapping and murder charges. Detective Santos had spent sleepless nights preparing for this moment, knowing that a misstep could compromise the prosecution's case and potentially allow Mitchell to escape justice after nearly 2 decades. Mitchell answered his front door wearing faded jeans and a Portland Trail Blazers sweatshirt, holding a coffee mug that read "World's Greatest Mechanic," a gift from customers who had trusted him with their vehicles and their safety for years. His expression showed confusion rather than surprise when Detective Santos identified herself and informed him that he was under arrest in connection with Eleanor Hayes' disappearance. "Robert Mitchell, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Eleanor Hayes," Detective Santos announced, her voice carrying the authority of years spent confronting dangerous criminals. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as handcuffs were applied, but he made no statements and requested an attorney immediately. His neighbors watched from windows and doorways as he was placed in the back seat of an unmarked sedan, their faces reflecting disbelief that the helpful mechanic they had known for years was allegedly responsible for one of Portland's most notorious cold cases. The search of Mitchell's property began within hours of his arrest, conducted by forensic specialists who methodically documented every room, every tool, every piece of potential evidence. The garage workshop revealed an organized collection of automotive equipment, customer files dating back 15 years, and personal notebooks containing detailed observations about female customers that went far beyond normal business records. Hidden in Mitchell's basement, investigators discovered a collection of photographs and personal items that painted a disturbing picture of his obsessions. The materials included surveillance-style photographs of young women taken without their knowledge, apparently captured over many years at various Portland locations. Some images showed women near their cars or walking alone at night, scenarios that suggested Mitchell had been stalking potential victims long before Eleanor's disappearance. Among the most damning evidence was a small jewelry box containing items that appeared to be trophies taken from victims. A student ID card from Portland State University belonging to a woman who had reported being followed, and earrings matching the description of jewelry that had gone missing from several customers' cars during repair work, and a hair ribbon that Eleanor's mother would later identify as belonging to her daughter. The community's reaction to Mitchell's arrest was immediate and intense. Local news crews gathered outside his house within hours, interviewing neighbors who struggled to reconcile their image of helpful Bobby the mechanic with allegations that he was a predatory killer who had operated undetected for decades. "We trusted him with our cars. Our daughters dropped their cars off alone at his shop," said Margaret Chen, who lived 2 blocks from Mitchell and had been his customer for 8 years. "He fixed my teenager's car when she was stranded downtown, drove her home personally when I couldn't pick her up. To think that he might have been... It makes me sick to think about what could have happened." The arrest triggered a flood of calls to Portland police from women who suddenly realized that uncomfortable interactions with Mitchell might have been criminal in nature. Several reported that he had made inappropriate comments about their appearances, had insisted on personally delivering their cars after repairs, or had shown up unexpectedly at their workplaces or homes under the pretense of checking on vehicle performance. Detective Santos coordinated with prosecutors to review these additional reports, looking for patterns that might establish Mitchell's involvement in other unsolved cases throughout the region. The investigation expanded beyond Eleanor Hayes to examine missing person reports and unsolved assaults involving young women in Portland between 2000 and Mitchell's arrest. Mitchell's ex-wife Linda provided crucial testimony about his behavior during their marriage, describing how he had gradually isolated her from friends and family while becoming increasingly controlling and violent. Her statements painted a picture of a man capable of elaborate deception and manipulative behavior that could easily have fooled customers and community members who knew him only in professional context. The interrogation of Mitchell proved frustrating for investigators, as he maintained silence on advice of his attorney and showed no emotional response to evidence presented during questioning. His demeanor remained calm and detached, suggesting either innocence or the practiced composure of someone who had spent years concealing his true nature from everyone around him. As news of the arrest spread throughout Portland's Southeast Division, residents grappled with the realization that evil had hidden among them for nearly 20 years, disguised as helpful neighborliness and reliable service, while a family had suffered in uncertainty and a community had lived with fear. The Multnomah County Courthouse had never seen crowds like those that gathered for Robert Mitchell's trial, which began on September 23, 2024, nearly 11 months after Eleanor Hayes' DNA breakthrough led to his arrest. The courtroom's gallery was packed daily with Eleanor's family, community members, and journalists covering a case that had captivated Portland for 18 years. Judge Patricia Henderson presided over proceedings with the gravity befitting a case that had haunted the community for nearly 2 decades. The prosecution team, led by District Attorney Michael Chen, had spent months building a case that relied heavily on forensic evidence, circumstantial connections, and testimony from witnesses who could establish Mitchell's pattern of predatory behavior. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," District Attorney Chen announced during opening statements, "this case represents the triumph of science over deception, of persistence over resignation, of truth over the lies that Robert Mitchell has told for 18 years. The evidence will show that the defendant used his position as a trusted mechanic to stalk, kidnap and murder Eleanor Hayes, then lived among us as though nothing had happened." The DNA evidence formed the prosecution's foundation, presented through testimony from Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic specialist who had analyzed the fabric sample from Eleanor's car. Walsh explained the scientific process in terms that jurors could understand, demonstrating how modern techniques could extract genetic profiles from evidence that had been unusable in "This is the science that speaks for Eleanor," Dr. Walsh told the jury, holding up the laboratory report that had broken the case. "DNA doesn't lie, it doesn't forget, and it doesn't change its story." The defendant's genetic material was in Eleanor Hayes's car, deposited at the time of her disappearance. Defense attorney Rebecca Martinez argued that DNA evidence alone was insufficient to prove murder, suggesting that Mitchell's genetic material could have been transferred to Eleanor's car during legitimate repair work at Morrison's auto garage. She challenged the prosecution to provide direct evidence of Mitchell's involvement in Eleanor's disappearance beyond circumstantial connections and forensic analysis. "My client was Eleanor Hayes' mechanic," Martinez told the jury during her opening statement. "Of course his DNA was in her car. He worked on that vehicle multiple times. The prosecution wants you to convict a man based on scientific speculation and coincidence, not proof beyond a reasonable doubt." The prosecution countered with testimony from former Morrison's auto garage employees, who described Mitchell's unusual behavior around female customers. James Chen, Mitchell's former co-worker, testified about Mitchell's practice of volunteering to work on young women's cars personally and his habit of keeping detailed notes about their personal lives and schedules. Eleanor's mother, Catherine Hayes, took the witness stand on October 2, nearly 18 years to the day after her daughter's disappearance. Her testimony was both heartbreaking and powerful, describing Eleanor's responsible nature, her close relationship with her family, and the devastating impact of nearly 2 decades without answers. "Eleanor would never have gotten into a car with a stranger," Catherine testified, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "But she would have trusted her mechanic. She would have gotten into a car with someone she thought was helping her." The most damning evidence came from the search of Mitchell's property, where investigators had discovered his collection of surveillance photographs and personal items that appeared to be trophies from victims. The prosecution presented each item carefully, establishing through witness testimony and forensic analysis that Mitchell had been stalking women throughout Portland for years. Mitchell's ex-wife Linda provided testimony about his controlling and manipulative behavior during their marriage, describing how he had monitored her movements and shown obsessive interest in tracking other women's activities. Her statements helped establish the psychological profile of someone capable of the calculated deception required to commit Eleanor's murder, while maintaining a facade of helpful community involvement. The defense attempted to present Mitchell as a devoted community member whose helpful nature had been misinterpreted as suspicious behavior. Character witnesses testified about his reliability as a mechanic, his regular church attendance, and his reputation for honesty in business dealings. However, these testimonies seemed to reinforce the prosecution's argument that Mitchell was skilled at deceiving those around him. After deliberating for 6 hours over 2 days, the jury returned guilty verdicts on charges of kidnapping in the first degree and murder in the second degree. The foreman read the verdict with a steady voice that carried throughout the silent courtroom. "We, the jury, find the defendant Robert Mitchell guilty on all charges." Eleanor's family embraced as Judge Henderson announced the verdict, tears of relief and grief flowing freely after 18 years of uncertainty. Catherine Hayes clutched Eleanor's photograph against her chest, finally able to say goodbye to her daughter, with the knowledge that justice had been served. The sentencing hearing, held 3 weeks later, resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Mitchell showed no emotion as Judge Henderson pronounced the sentence, maintaining the same detached demeanor he had displayed throughout the trial. And as the judge's gavel echoed through the courtroom, Portland began to heal from a wound that had remained open for nearly 2 decades, finding closure in truth and justice for Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor Hayes' case stands as a testament to the power of scientific advancement, family persistence, and community memory in achieving justice against seemingly impossible odds. The breakthrough that solved her 18-year-old cold case demonstrates how modern forensic technology can unlock mysteries that frustrated previous generations of investigators, providing hope for thousands of other families waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. The role of DNA analysis in Eleanor's case illustrates the importance of preserving evidence, even when current technology cannot process it effectively. The fabric sample that cracked the case had waited in storage for nearly 2 decades, useless until scientific methods evolved to extract meaningful information from degraded biological material. This lesson has influenced evidence retention policies nationwide, encouraging law enforcement agencies to maintain physical evidence indefinitely, rather than disposing of items that seem to have no investigative value. Catherine Hayes' unwavering dedication to keeping her daughter's case visible proved crucial in maintaining community awareness and police attention. Her annual vigils, media interviews, and advocacy work ensured that Eleanor's disappearance never became just another forgotten file in a storage room. The porch light that burned for 18 years became a symbol of hope that resonated far beyond Portland's Southeast Division, inspiring other families to maintain their own vigils for missing loved ones. The community's response to Eleanor's case and Mitchell's eventual arrest demonstrates both the vulnerability and resilience of neighborhoods where residents trust each other's children to local businesses and service providers. The betrayal felt by Mitchell's customers was profound, but it led to important conversations about safety awareness and the reality that predators often hide behind facades of helpfulness and community involvement. Eleanor's legacy lives on through legislative changes that improved missing person investigation protocols, support networks for families of the disappeared, and educational programs that teach young people about personal safety without destroying their ability to trust their communities. Her story reminds us that justice, though sometimes delayed, remains possible when science, persistence, and community memory work together toward truth. The porch light on Catherine Hayes' house was finally turned off on November 15, 2024, exactly 18 years, 1 month, and 1 day after Eleanor disappeared. Catherine stood on her front steps that evening, her hand on the light switch, and whispered, "Welcome home, sweetheart. You can rest now."